Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Um, Forgot to ask what episode this was. It's got to be mid 50s somewhere.
59, ain't
Um,
it?
I was thinking it was about 59. So that's pretty exciting. Um, a lot of things going on. We've been super busy at work. Races been busy. There was a couple rainouts this weekend. Some racetracks around the area got it in, and some racetracks didn't. Boone canceled. I think they canceled a little early, but they just put all their wood chips on for the year to start blending them in for the Super Nationals, and I don't think they wanted to tear up their racetrack a whole lot, so they canceled after a little bit of a rain shower. Um, Got a couple notes here. Got to congratulate Alex Crawford. He's a true show watcher on his win number 2 and says all of our help at this show is helping him win these races. Roy Stanley was a gentleman who was at our Pennsylvania school. He got his first win of the year, and he's also a loyal Bob and Chad watcher. So congratulations, guys, and I appreciate you letting me know that. Amy wanted to make sure I remind everybody that tomorrow is Trophy Tuesdays. So if you haven't got your wins into us by tomorrow, you'll be on next week's list. We kind of went to a Trophy Tuesday and changed things up just a little bit. Uh, Kind of doesn't give everybody a lot of time to get stuff in, but we still get our winners in there. And had quite a few stock car and hobby stock winners this weekend. So pretty cool. So what's new and exciting at Weir's Machine?
Well, not too much. Plugging away here. Busy Monday. Big week for us. This is, for me personally and the company, 25 years. June 11th. Saturday is the official day. So we started some throwback stuff last Thursday, and we're prepping some more throwback stuff this week, and going to have a little fun with it. And I know they're working on my buddy Marky's working on the new 25th anniversary apparel, so we'll probably have that ready to go for Super Nationals. And hard to believe, I feel like we just celebrated that 20th, and
I was just
came.
going to say, I thought we just went through 20th here.
Boy, the last 5 years have been a blur, but no, we're keeping pretty busy. I've been working on a lot of new stuff, which is weird. You know, we're kind of ahead of schedule on that. We released the Cyper, and I got about 5 or 6 things on my desk that we're working on. So it's going to be an exciting summer here with some testing and new stuff. And
Cool.
you know, you've been a part of it, working on the new lower control arm checker and a couple other things we got brewing. And so we're plugging away here.
Awesome. Well, that sounds real good. Um, any races coming up that you're going to? 141, you said.
Yeah, we're going to 141. I went to Fountain City last Friday for the Dirt Kings late model deal. It was a pretty good show. You know, Fountain City doesn't disappoint. So looking forward to getting back to 141. I didn't go last year. Austin went. I don't know why I missed last year, but we're all going, and it's going to be a fun week. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, the only race I got to this weekend was the Thursday night. I went up to Kasuth County Speedway for their. They had the SMLR late models, I think is the term that they had late models there, and then of course their regular weekly shows. So I got to see some of the weekly guys. Um, Awesome racetrack. I thought they did a good job. Some of the drivers thought that it wasn't very passable, but I don't know. I seen the guy in the 3 car start dead last, and in my opinion, with about 2 laps to go, I thought he was going to win the thing, passing on the outside, and it was kind of comical because it's pretty cool when you see these seasoned veterans. You know, Kelly runs that stock car. Well, you could see with about 5 laps to go, he could see there was probably wasn't gonna get the win in that stock car, and his teammate was leading at the time. So you could tell he starts searching around, trying different lanes and trying a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, he's actually testing for his modified. And he tried pretty hard in that middle lane. And the modified, that's where he did his passing. I mean, it was pretty impressive. This car was working good, and like I said, it was pretty cool. He did an awesome job. I was pretty impressed with. His car's looking really good this year. So he's won some races, and he's having a good season. So that's pretty cool. Larry wants to know if I'm going to be attending the Midwest Madness Tour. Probably not. Hang on a second here. Probably not. We've got so many other things going on right now. It's just a little bit hectic. We're busy at work, and so that's been going pretty good. Tim wants to know, right front's a little bouncy on the brakes. Should I stiffen just the right front spring? What would happen if I stiffen both? Should I stiffen just right front? Well, spring's not going to control your bounce. If you go stiffer on your spring, you're still going to get bounce. Shock absorber is going to be more your answer, probably doing something with a little bit more stiffer compression, maybe a little bit more rebound, giving that right front a little bit more control. I'd check out my brakes because maybe there's something going on goofy with that right front brake. If it only happens when it's on the brakes, that leads me to believe that something's not quite as good as it should be with the whole brake system there. I can't really actually tell you what it would be, but it would lead me to believe that the right front might be grabbing or something like that. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, it sounds like there's either a shock problem or something going on with the brakes there. But yeah, I agree. The spring is not going to control the bounce. The shock controls the bounce. So I'd send your shocks to Bob.
Yeah, well, there you go. Dan, if you were racing Independence, Iowa, what gear would you recommend for a 604? Boy, Dan, I'm the wrong guy to ask about that gearing thing, but maybe there's somebody that's listening that runs Independence Weekly and can give us a clue. I'm not real sure. I couldn't tell you. That's just not something I get into a whole lot anymore, is the gears or engines or any of that type of stuff. Phil, the 3-link Wasota Midwest Modified car falls off the left lower and it really bounces down the straightaway with no forward drive. 3-link Midwest Modified, or Wasota Modified, Midwest Modified, falls off the left lower. Well, that's really hard to say. It kind of almost sounds like you might need to go stiffer with the compression driver situation. I'd recommend trying to do a little bit more trail braking, keeping the bar angle in the car so that it doesn't fall off that. Because once it, and that's going to happen. Once you lose that angle, your traction is going to be out the window. So, and I know the answer is not to put a real stiff compression shock on there, but we have some customers that really struggle with that trail braking thing, that we have to put a real stiff compression shock to keep the car up on the left rear, to kind of help the driver drive the car with what he knows how to drive the car. And like I said, some guys struggle with that trail braking thing, and I understand that. I'm not saying I could do it, but that's one thing I would suggest. Sandra, what's our opinion on grinding tires on a moist type racetrack? Well, if I didn't have to grind a tire, I'd never grind a tire, because anytime you grind a tire, you're technically taking rubber off that tire. I watched a guy the other night up to Algona grind his tires between heat race and feature. And then I watched a guy right next to him didn't touch his tires all night long. And they finished respectively 6th and 7th in the feature. So I can't say that the grinding the tires was the answer. I personally think some of these guys get overdone on grinding these tires. I think there's too much. It just takes rubber off the tire. I mean, so in my opinion, I wouldn't unless I absolutely had to. If the only time I'd grind a tire is if it's glazed. If there's a glaze on the tire, then I would grind it. But if that tire's not shiny, I wouldn't put a grinder on it. Jason, Amod, what couple adjustments to make as the racetrack dries out? I wish I could figure out how to make this window on my screen so that you can see a whole lot more questions at one time. Anyway, what couple adjustments to make as the racetrack dries out throughout the night? It's kind of, one of the adjustments, of course, depending on the racetrack and stuff, a lot of times I change right rear shocks. If the racetrack's drying out, slowing down, I'll put a softer compression shock on there with maybe a little bit more rebound to get a little bit more traction. The other thing that's pretty common, is work with my chain. Some guys like a little bit more chain to get a little bit more steer so that they don't, and some guys don't like as much steer. Kind of just depends. What's your opinion, Chad? What other adjustments?
I'd say the biggest thing is to not over tighten. I watch so many guys when it gets slick out over tighten, and then they got to get wheel to turn, and then when they get too much wheel and they pick up the fuel, then they're automatically loose. So I like to tune the right rear because the right rear doesn't have a ton of effect on entry, but it has traction off the corners. So tuning the right side 4-link rods is probably one of my go-tos, but there's a ton of adjustments there. But like I said, you really got to focus on the ones that don't tighten entry because the pace slows down and you need to be able to roll in there and not be too tight. But it's tough, man. There's no tougher tuning than dry slick for sure with a dirt car.
And some guys take stagger out. I'm not totally convinced that that's the answer either. I think the biggest thing is, like you just said, people over tighten the car. Let the car's got to be able to drive itself when the racetrack gets dry slick. It's got to roll without you having to muscle it, because as soon as you muscle it, you're breaking traction. Dan, USRA BMOD, I have 42 degrees on my left rear on the chain. I'm in the bottom hole on my rear's cage and the top hole on my frame. This is a 2-link car. 4.5 inches of drop axle moves 2 7/8 on the chain. Would you suggest drilling another hole on the chassis to get it to the 45 degrees? Honestly, yeah. I'd probably strongly consider putting another hole in the chassis and shortening up the chain a little bit. Get that to the point where on a slick type racetrack where you're only getting about 2.5 inches of steer in the car, I think makes a little bit more sense. 2 7/8, to 3 inches, that's a fair amount of steer in the car. So if you went with another hole up, then you could actually easily adjust the car to get more static angle and have more angle up against the chain without having quite so much steer in the car.
You missed one. You missed one with Renee back there. A couple. What's a good starting point for right front camber and IMCA modified?
Oh, gotcha. Depending on the car, but they're all sisters anyway, so they're about the same. They camber wise, if you can get 6.5 degrees, 6.5 to 7 degrees, in my opinion, is what I'd run for camber. Biggest thing you got to do is make sure that you take the spring out, jack that thing up so that roll it over on the right front, or jack the spring up, or jack the car up with the shock on it so that your A-frame's not hitting the shock. What happens is a lot of times with too much camber in there, then we're moving the ball joint of the upper control arm is getting closer to the shock, and it'll come up and can bottom out on the shock, put a dent in the shock, and puts a dent in the body of the shock. That's a $200 repair. So be careful about that. I would rather go 6.5 degrees and have clearance than 6 3/4 and take myself out of a $200 shock absorber. Okay. Jim, 3-link USRA B-mod. Can you have too much split in your rear spring table? Oh, I would agree with that. I think anything on these cars today, it's the old adage where 1 inch is good, 2 inches is better, and 3 is optimum. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I like to see it within a 2-inch split. 1 to 2 inches, in my opinion, is pretty good. Just enough that it can roll over easily without having to go up and over, so to speak. Kind of like that camshaft effect, if you know what I'm saying. So like if you've got 4 or 5 inches, that's way too much. And that's the thing with, like with an IMC Sport Mod guys, the guys that go to that 11-inch spring, I think that's almost too much split to the point where what happens is it'll go to roll over and then it falls over, and then it just lays there and gets lazy because it can't necessarily come back up. And so, yeah, too much split could definitely be a disadvantage. Murray, Wasota Midwest modified 3-link Shaw car. Car pushes, doesn't turn on dry slick. When I start to pick up the throttle, I'm up into the right rear trailing arm, 5/8 of an inch and 4 inches of stagger, and it still won't turn. Do I need more trail or less crossweight, or what's the question? I'd be looking at my front end, to be honest with you. Whether it needs to be softer on the right front, the car's not getting over on the right front. Because with the amount of what you're telling me, like 4 inches of stagger, the stagger is going to keep the car tight getting into the corner, but the second you apply the throttle, the stagger is going to turn it. If the front end takes off, well, as soon as you apply the throttle, that's telling me that the right front, if the car's not getting on the right front enough, it's not loading the right front, just as a thing to do. And I'm not saying this is the answer to everything, but if you want to experiment to see if the right front's the issue, put a 25-pound chunk of lead right up there by the valve covers, as close to the upper control arm as you can on the nose bars. And if all of a sudden now the car starts to turn, that's telling you that before the car wasn't getting on the right front enough. There wasn't enough weight transfer to the right front corner of the car, creating the front end to actually stick. What's your opinion on that one, Chad?
I think you pretty much hit that on the head.
Wasota B-mod, what can I do to add more bite out of the turn? Car gets in and out of the corner, great. Bottom hole on the frame J-bar currently is in the center of the pinion. 1.5 inches of stagger and a 1-inch spacer on the left rear. I don't know what you have for, I would say physically adding more bite. You might end up, if you add more bite, you might have to put a little bit more J-bar in it, because when you put more bite in the left rear tire to get the tire to come up off the corner a little better. And I don't know if Wasota has an actual rule about this or not, but I think you could put some lead in the car, lengthen that left side out. That would probably be one of my go-tos. Get the car to come up off the corner a little bit more square. Keep in mind when you put lead in the car, people think, well, it's going to drag down the straightaway. Well, that's not true, because just like you heard the USRA BMOD guy's question here a little bit ago, he had 2 3/4 inches or 2 7/8 inches of steer when he's up on the bars. So if we take 1/4 inch of lead and lengthen that left rear 1/4 inch, that's just going to take the steer down to 2 5/8 inch. So it's not like you're dragging the, that's a very big misconception. In fact, and this is a good time to add I had a couple questions in the last week, a couple different guys talking about side bite. And both of them had the question, how can I get more side bite off the corner? Well, first of all, what you're actually thinking is the car's actually tailing out on you, which means it probably needs less steer. So I would put some less static steer in there by lengthening the left side wheelbase, because if you feel that you need side bite off the corner, that's the feeling that the car is tailing out on you. And that's actually because the right rear is just tractioning better than the left rear. Side bite's more of an actual term for when you're in the middle of the corner and you go in the middle of the corner and either the car stays underneath you, or all of a sudden the car rolls on the right rear, sticks the right rear hard and tries to shove the nose. That's where the actual term side bite comes into play more than up off the corner. If it's an up off the corner thing, it's more of a traction question. And so that's kind of falls into this question here. Wasota Amod we got a whole group of Wasota USRA guys tonight. Wasota Amod having a real hard time getting initial bite drive off the start. I feel like the right rear always wants to spin and tail out, sometimes even while trail braking. Is this a pull bar issue, or is the car not rolling enough on the right rear? It could be a pull bar issue. You might need a pull bar that maybe gives you a little bit more, it's a little softer on low speed, so it doesn't quite lock up quite so quickly to spin the tires. That's a good possibility. The other thing is, of course, once again, I'm kind of a believer in wanting to know what the amount of steer the car has coming up off the corner. We might need to take some steer out of it if the tail feels like it's wanting to jump out and the right rear is not biting. If the right rear is the one that's spinning, it's the old adage where, feed the heat. So that would lead me to believe if the right rear is not spinning or is spinning too much, you might want a softer shock with more rebound on that corner. That's going to definitely help traction the car up off the corner. The other thing, like I said, lead would be a good idea. Putting some right rear bar angle in that right rear to get that right rear moving more. What's your opinion, Chad?
I was going to say drive angle. I think the drive angle and to get the quickness of that initial traction is going to be a lot of bar related, I would say. But also if you have too much stagger and you hit the fuel, it's going to want to snappy too. But on starts, it's kind of tough there. But drive angle is very influential on the straight line off the corner on a start too.
Well, the thing is, he could raise his lower bar on the bird cage, which is going to put more indexing into it. It's going to quicken that up, getting it up off the corner. And actually lowering the bar on the cage on the upper would probably help that situation too, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, they're both going to make instant traction and drive angle, so
right.
Both of them would intensify that and help that. Yep.
Running a UMP Shaw car, struggling to stick the right rear in the center of the corner. Have a 125 spring preloaded to 225, 400 pounds of load at height of 550 right front, 500 right front, 550 left front. Well, and David, I think that's kind of we sort of answered that same type of question here with the guy before. Bar angles are going to be a huge deal. I know one of my go-tos if I'm struggling on traction is raising that lower bar up one hole, which would be what, hole number 4?
On the
Or is it
cage,
3? Or is it 3.5?
it'd be the 3.5 hole from, or no, it'd be 4 from 3.5. So up
Okay,
1 hole on the cage, or you could do down 1 hole on the chassis. The
right.
cage being more effective, or the right top rod could have a little bit too much angle also there. On the UMP cars, I know they like to have a lot of top rod because generally they got a sticky tire and big power, and they need to rotate in the mud. But later on in the night, that could be just to flattening that out, just a tickle.
Yeah, that would probably help quite a bit. I mean, your right rear springs at 225. That sounds pretty common. I mean, that's what we run, 225s, 250s. I would tell you to try a little softer spring, which would help you get up off the corner better, but it's going to hurt you in the middle. It's going to make the car feel a little lazy getting in, a little lazy through the middle. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would think that, like I said, one of the things that I like to do is that raising that lower link on the cage, but just seems to put instant traction because, of course, once again, it makes that indexing happen a little bit quicker and seems to stick that right rear tire just a little bit better. Greg, what does angle the pull bar to the right front do? Where should I start with a 2022 GRT? Well, when you angle it to the front, the key is you want to know where that pull bar goes. So take your right front spring out, let the right front down to where you think the spring travel is, ½ inch from bottoming out on the shock. Jack it up underneath the seat to 13 inches or up against the chain. And what you're going to see is that pull bar is going to actually move to the left. Now, in my opinion, the idea behind that is when we move it, when it does go back to the left, that we're trying under static or under dynamic conditions, we're trying to get drive to both rear tires. So I think that's what I would probably do. I would move it so that when it's all in dynamic mode, that I'm probably fairly straight in the car. I think that's going to give you the best load equally on the 2 tires. When you offset it to one side or the other, that's going to probably load it a little bit more. Now, if you're running racetracks that are a little higher bank or have a little bit more grip, I'm not opposed to moving that right on the rear end an inch to the right. I think with a crate, especially if you're running a crate motor, the crate motor seems to like that a little better. Tom, IMCA Sport Mod. Well, we finally got an IMCA guy. What the heck? IMCA Sport Mod. Tried a soft right front spring, soft left rear load last year. Worked on hammer down racetracks or bone slick. Anything in between left or rear would drive up the racetrack terrible. But I feel like that's where everyone is going. Well, yeah, yes and no. I don't, that soft left rear with a sport mod, that's kind of a little bit of a trickier situation. That soft right front, that seems to be common. Where we're at, we're equal springs. Pair of 500s across the front is what we recommend. I myself have not been as big of a fan of that soft left rear on a 2-link car. I think there's a little bit of inconsistency there. Now, if you're running an open motor, I think the additional RPM and the additional motor can make that deal work. Like the guy that you're probably talking about that wins fairly often in your area. I think that works pretty good. But on a crate motor, I don't know if I think it's a little too finicky, but I know that's where a lot of people are going. We still run a 175 left rear and seems to make the car more consistent, but that's with a crate. I don't have a tremendous amount of open customers. I got one open customer that's won 5 features this year, and I know he's running a 175 left rear spring and a 225 right rear. Kind of goes back to that notebook thing. Just because you think everybody else is doing it, there's probably something's going on, something differently there with shocks, whatever. I'm not really sure what could be going on there, but I've not mastered that soft spring on a crate sport mod. IMCA modified, I've got more right rear upper trailing arm angle than the left rear upper rod. The car turns good in the center now, but is lazy. What would the recommendation I change to make that car not push in the center of the corner? Well, I would be a little concerned about the fact that if you've got, too much right rear bar angle is going to make that car feel like it has a really stiff right rear spring. And what's going to happen is that car is going to be a little bit lazy because it's not as responsive. But what's going to happen is it could feel lazy just because of the fact that the spring isn't as responsive. But you're going to go from a situation where the car is going to be tight, 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 and then it could be snappy loose. And more than likely, once you just get past the apex of the corner, that thing's probably a little bit hesitant whether it wants to get a little free on you. And that would be, in my opinion, that's too much bar angle. 18 to 20 degrees on the right upper seems to be the common number that we see most all the way around. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, for sure. Spot on. 18 to 20.
And if you're getting more than that, and if you don't have as much in the left rear, the left rear, we're running 28 degrees in a static measure to the point where in dynamic mode, we're seeing 48, 50 degrees. That seems to be pretty common anymore. What would change not to make the car not push in the center? Well, I would take some in answer to your question, I'd take some bar angle out of it. If you had an IMCA Northern mod that handled great on 3/8 mile racetrack and were to go to a quarter mile bull ring, what's the first adjustment you would change or you would think about doing? Probably not much. We don't change a lot, if it's a real small racetrack, we might soften up the compression of the right front shock. I don't change springs. The thing is if the car is actually good on a 3/8 mile racetrack, it's probably going to be pretty good on that quarter mile racetrack. More stagger, probably a little more front stagger to help the car turn on its own. A little more rear stagger, probably to help it turn. But I don't do a lot of major changes. On that 3/8 mile racetrack, I'd probably run more trail than I would on the quarter. More lead than I would on the quarter. I would maybe lengthen my right trailing arm out a turn so I had a little bit more just to make sure that it turns, how sharp the corners are, make sure it turns. USRA, Dan, your questions are long here. It's hard for me to read. USRA B mod, when I lower the right rear bar on the chassis for the feature, did not seem to tighten the car. Then I noticed that when I lowered the bar one hole, it was pushing the rear end back. So when I lowered the bar, I have to shorten it an inch and a 1.5 turns to keep the wheelbase the same. If I go up one hole, it does not change the wheelbase. So just because the holes on the chassis are drilled in an arc doesn't mean they're accurate. Oh, I can't disagree with you there, because keep in mind, depending on what arc you're in, where you're at on the cage, because they might be set for a 5-inch drop on the cage in a specific arc, and then if you go up 2 holes or down a hole or whatever, it's going to change that whole arc. So yeah, just because it looks like they're in an arc, you're doing the right thing, Dan, by measuring all this stuff. That's one of the misconceptions that people look at, the fact that if the holes look like they're in an arc, then they shouldn't have to worry about it. No, this is all the things you need to do in the wintertime, or when you have spare time. And I know summer doesn't give us much spare time, but that's doing your homework. You did a good job with that.
I think this was the tech tip last week.
I
Tech
think
tip
you're right.
Tuesday. But from a manufacturer's standpoint, like we make a frame mount, we make cages, we make all these climbers and all this stuff on an arc, but we're never going to be able to make it perfect for every race car. So it's very important to, whether you're adjusting a trailing arm or a pannier bar or a pull bar, to make sure that your pinion angle, your left to right, and your wheelbase are always the same, and your index to your suspension cages, because it's impossible for us to cover all scenarios when we're building the parts on arcs and trying to keep it lined up. But yeah, definitely need to double check them measurements.
Well, and that's another good point from the chassis manufacturer standpoint. The chassis manufacturer tells you to put this in this hole and put this in this hole. Your right rear's got to be in hole number 3. Your left rear's got to be in hole number 5. So that, because like our cars are made to the point where we use the Weir's brackets on our car, and we run hole number 5 on the left rear and hole number 3 on the right rear, and that's where our arc is made from. Now, if you choose to run hole number 2 or hole number 4 on the right rear, the arc is not going to be the same. It's going to change the wheelbase. So back to the chassis manufacturer, he needs to, you need to understand when he's telling you something, that's not just because he woke up one morning and decided that looked good. More than likely, he's done his homework and built you a quality piece race car. Bryce, thanks again, guys. Tried to go back and find it on an old video, but getting to be too many. Well, yeah, because like if Chad says there's 59 of them, that's 59 of them. Holy moly.
59 hours of listening.
Yeah, holy cow. You've got to have more fun than I would have. Chad, isn't the shock mount split on the 4-link car supposed to be at 7 in the left and 6 on the right?
That's where I like a 1-inch split. Some guys are 6 and 5, but I like to keep a 1-inch split. It kind of keeps the car wedged up a little bit better than if they're at the same height. And the right rear should always be a little bit higher, because you need to get into that spring quicker so you can turn into the corner, and it just helps entry having that 1 inch higher than the left rear. You missed one too. Did you see that? Yeah. Adriel Shepard.
Oh yeah, Adriel. I run an older Allen chassis that has a pretty narrow front wheelbase. And the car seems to handle well, but I've noticed some guys are using the 3-piece spindles and widening their front end out. Do you think widening the car out will make this steer even better? Yes, I would agree. Widening the car out is definitely going to make the car steer better. It's going to make it, I wouldn't say it's going to make it more responsive. I would say it's going to be more comfortable. Rather than radically responsive, it's going to be more drivable, to the point where the car just kind of does its thing better. Now, going to the three-piece spindles is not necessarily a bolt-on deal if you have pinto spindles on there. You're going to want to talk to somebody about, or wherever you get your three-piece spindles from. You need to find out what ball joints you need to run, because it's the kingpin is different in those spindles. So you've got to change the ball joint to get the correct amount of roll center to get the car to work right, because you might just put them on and all of a sudden they might make the car worse. Where they made it better, other places could be worse. So just make sure, whoever you're talking with, or whoever your chassis builder is, make sure that when you get the three-piece spindles that they recommend what ball joints you run, and go from there. Bryce, again, thanks. Oh, yeah, we already had that one. I had Dan's. Nate. This is where I should be at, Nate.
No, Dan's got another one. That's another Dan one. Dan's busy. It's a new Dan one.
A new Dan one.
Can't keep the right rail out of the dirt.
Can't keep the right rail out of the dirt. Car's wheeling up on the left front. I'm going from 3 to 5 compression on the right front shock. Right front spring is a 550. Would you go to a 575 or a right front, a 225 right rear, thinking I should go to a 250? What is your thoughts about putting a few turns in the right front, 1.25 inch drop on the axle chain, the axle on the chain, move ahead 2 7/8 of an inch? Should I shorten the chain? I would recommend shortening the chain. You can raise the right front up, but the problem is if it's getting in the dirt, it's kind of the old saying goes that if you're a foot off the wall and you hit the wall, it's going to hurt, but not near as bad as if you're 3 feet off the wall and hit the wall. It's going to hurt even worse. Don't believe me, any of those guys who watched the race on Sunday, just ask Kevin Harvick how much that really hurts, because I bet you he has a pretty good idea. He smacked that thing pretty hard. I think he's got too much chain and too much steer. I think the chain is hurting the car more than helping the car, in my opinion. Nate, right rear bars and springs on an IMC amount of it. I hear so many different theories on bar angle and spring rate. What's a good recommendation for starting angle on the bar angle and the spring rate? As a rule of thumb, like I said, the right rear, we always run the upper bars 18 to 20 degrees. That's a pretty standard number. Whenever I went less than that, makes the car feel lazy, makes the car feel soft on spring, makes it feel like it needs more right rear spring. Spring wise, just depends. We've got guys running 225s. I've got some guys that are running as much as 300 pounds. As a rule of thumb, I like that 225, 250 range for a standard right rear suspension. That seems to work pretty good. Okay. Derek, on an IMCA stock car running on tracks that get slick for the feature, I am going from a 150 16-inch spring to a 16-inch 150 16-inch left rear to a 16 125. How much more preload should I put on that 125 versus that 150 I have in the car right now? Or if I scale the car, do I lower the bike number or put it back the same with me in the car? I would put it back to the same with you in the car. When I change springs from that that 150 to that 125, I would make sure my scale number was exactly the same. As a rule of thumb, that 125 is going to probably need a, a well, probably going to need about another turn in it to get it back to where it was with the 150. I'd have to have a calculator to give you the exact amount, but I'm thinking one turn is probably going to be pretty close. But if you scale it with it, change it, adjust it so that the left rear has the same amount of bite in the car that you had before, that's the thing you really want to do. And make sure you do that with you in the car. Chris Mercer, left rear drop, left rear lower angle on a USRA stock car at attitude. Well, you know, at attitude with that left rear lower bar, the left rear drop, of course, I'm not as familiar with the USRA rules, if they've got a shock drop rule or not, but that left rear trailing arm bar, static wise, that thing, probably is going to need to be in that, kind of like we do with our sport mods. I mean, if you can get that thing into that 40 degree in a dynamic mode, would be pretty good. Because static mode, we start at 20 degrees. So, 35 degrees is probably realistic. That's a great question, though. The next time we have a stock car in there, I will actually, when they're scaling it, I'll actually have them do that. We'll take the spring out and run it over in attitude and actually measure that. I've never actually measured that, to be honest with you. We just had a couple of stock cars in there last week, and I could have done that. But I think we've got another one coming in sometime next week. So, Chris, I'll make sure and do that. That's a great question. It's something I need to know for sure. Blake, on a hobby stock in the slime or hammer down, is it better to stiffen the right side or soften it for spring rate? Well, if it's slime, you're going to want to do like you would on a slick racetrack, and I would go softer. If the racetrack is hammered down heavy, I would go stiffer, just because those cars, you don't have anything to regulate how much they roll other than suspension and springs, and you can't really adjust bite and all that stuff on a hobby stock. So stiffer springs would be my answer. Okay. Chester, okay, so we raised the right upper rod to make the car not push in the center anymore, but now it's higher than the left. What adjustment could we do instead of raising the right rear bar so much so that the car doesn't push in the center? What's your opinion, Chad?
Well, I mean, if you had to raise the right top rod up to be more than the left to get the thing to rotate, the panel bar is either way too low. Something else is going on there. If you got to have that much angle to get that thing to rotate, you need to do something else, because when you have all that driving on the right rear, it's just going to make the car very inconsistent, and I'm not a fan of that. So something else is going on there, whether it's the wheelbase. If you're rolling tight in the middle of the corner, it's probably the panel bar. If you're picking up the fuel tight, it's probably the pull bar angle. I don't know what kind of car you got, but I assume a modified 4-link. But something else is going on. To free the car up, I wouldn't raise the right top rod to be higher than the left top rod, just because it's not going to be good at all.
No, not at all. I would agree with Chad on the panhard bar. Sounds to me like you've got the panhard bar way too low on the rear end. I'd raise the panhard bar up on the rear end. I don't know where your right lower bar is. You might have your right lower bar too low in the front. That could cause it, but Once you start getting that right bar too high, it's going to make the car inconsistent. And like I said, what's going to happen is you're right. That car's going to push in the middle, and then it's going to be snappy loose off the corner and uncontrollable to drive. Running 4-bar Shaw, how to get more traction off the corner? Well, my smart remark would be is less motor. That'd be my first thing is knock a spark plug off. I mean, that'll give you more traction. I mean, shit. Now, if you got a crate motor, I don't know. The thing is there's, to get more traction off the corner, it all depends on what happened in the beginning of the corner. If the car rolls in good, turns good in the middle of the corner, you just need more traction off the corner. Once again, on a 4-bar car, I like raising that lower trailing arm on the cage. I think that definitely helps the car up off the corner. I like putting a little bit of lead in the car so that taking some of the rear steer out of the car. A little less stagger would help the car get off the corner a little better. Those would be some things to go. But if the car pushes like a dump truck getting in and then has no traction getting off, that means that the car is too tight in the beginning. So this kind of all depends on what happens. Phase 1 and phase 2 has a big bearing on what really happens on phase 3. So you just got to analyze the car and really pick it apart, corner entry, mid corner, and then we usually tuning the car off the corner can be actually done by tuning it into the corner and in the middle of the corner. Nate, thanks. We enjoy watching and hearing you guys say, as well as others, we're in Michigan, and it's tough to keep up with what's happening out west. Hey, I'm in the Midwest, and it's still, you really gotta be paying attention on a daily basis because God only knows what could happen. Chad and I were talking about some things at the beginning of the show or before we went live that I'm like, what the heck? You just never know. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on, and then there's a lot of fads too. I mean, there's a lot of things that this is the new latest greatest thing, and then we find out, we were joking. We had a guy the other night that had all these trick things on his right rear, and he was doing a great job of covering it up, and then the car was parked next to him, and it was just kind of there doing his thing, and they ran 6th and 7th. So I don't know what all they covered up, but I couldn't see that it was a whole lot of speed. But whatever, at least they felt good about it. What's your thoughts on going below 0 degrees on the right rear lower bar? Well, I think there's times where that has an advantage. Like if you were running a little bit stiffer right rear spring, that could help the car come off the corner a little bit better. It kind of counteracts what's going on the right rear. That would be my suggestion or my thoughts. What's your thoughts, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, the right rear lower bar, we're starting at 0 to 3 degrees up. So if you're at 1 degree and you go down a hole, you could be -0.5 or -1, or there's nothing wrong with that. -5 or 6 or 7 degrees, it's not going to be a good deal. But if you're tuning that right rear with that trailing arm and you're going a hole down on the frame or a hole up on the cage, you could be below a negative angle on it, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, once the car rolls on the right rear, you're going to be at a negative angle anyway.
Yeah.
So in dynamic, it's a negative angle. It just all depends on how much negative angle you want to go.
Correct.
If you start with a little bit more of a negative angle, it's going to take a little steer out of the car. USRA BMod 3-link switched right rear spring locations from center on the tube to a slider behind. Where's brackets How far from the tube do I mount the slider mount? 6 inches down from center of tube, question mark.
So you're just going to want to make sure you don't run out of travel on your slider. On the two-link cars where the cage isn't indexing, so it's a solid cage or whatnot, the height doesn't have as much effect as it does on a four-link suspension cage with bearings. So the biggest thing you're going to want to make sure is that you don't, overextend your slider and run out of travel there.
Vic's having issues going through ruts and bumps on the racetrack. Do we look at springs or shocks? Car gets tight over the ruts. Well, that's not uncommon for a car to get tight over the ruts. That means you're running the car relatively snug to begin with. Spring-wise, I tend to lean more towards shock compressions. If I get in a real rough racetrack, I tend to lean towards my shocks because, of course, the springs regulate how much travel you have. Shocks regulate how fast it does travel. So if we're in holes and ruts, we want to stiffen the compression or stiffen the shock absorber a little bit to get more dynamic wheel control. And so that would be the case. Why the car gets tight over the ruts. You're running an IMCA car with our IMCA tires, so we tend to run these cars a tad bit on the snug side to begin with. So once we start breaking traction and ruts and stuff, they tend to want to run up the hill. That's not uncommon. If you can control some of that, so that they're not bouncing so much, that would definitely be better. Okay, I run an IMCA modified with an open motor and can't hook it up to catch the crates. How beneficial is a restrictor plate from Weirs?
Yeah, so like Bob just said a little bit ago, I mean, you want traction, knock a spark plug off. So that's kind of what we do with the restrictors. In the early in the night when it's tractioned up and you got a lot of grip, then you'll have that open motor advantage. And then later in the night, you can take the restrictors and kind of choke it down and take some power away to get that traction. Kind of like what Bob said, you want to take power away later in the night. So the only thing is an IMCA, the rule says it has to be one piece. So make sure you don't buy our two piece where you can change out the centers. So you'd have to buy a one piece, completely one piece machined restrictor. So which we have available. You can give us a call and we can get that tuned in for you if you want, but they definitely work. The late model, that's almost all the late model teams are playing with that every night. They'll qualify, maybe run their heat with their wide open max power 900 horsepower, and then by the end of the night they got a 1 inch or an inch and an eighth in there and they're choking that thing down 100 horsepower. So there's definitely room for improvement there.
Well, the thing is Randall, you have to understand with the open motor, you're running more RPMs. So it's a whole lot easier to break those tires loose. So if you do put that restrictor plate in, what it does is it takes the low end down so that it's not quite so sharp and snappy off the bottom of the throttle, and allows those tires to kind of hook up a little bit on their own before the motor actually comes to life. It doesn't really, the restrictor plate doesn't really kill a tremendous amount of top end. It's more low end, isn't it, Chad?
Correct. Yeah, it takes that initial torque away. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Well, we've had a great night tonight. A lot of really good questions. A great group of questions. Great group of guys. I always enjoy it. I look forward to every other Tuesday or every other Monday night. Now, next week or next time, June 20th. This is 6th. We would be back here June 20th. So 2 weeks from tonight, 7 o'clock. Look forward to seeing everybody and talking with everybody again. Thanks, Chad.
Yep. Another good night. Thank you.